Welcome to AEIOU, a podcast about Austria. I'm Andrew, your host. Let's start this episode with an obvious statement. There are many podcasts about World War I, and any one of them would likely do a better job of covering the Great War than this one would, and that includes the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie in Sarajevo, the event most often identified as having set off the war. In fact, for this particular event, I'd recommend the Assassinations podcast, which covers the events in Sarajevo in its second episode. Therefore, what I want to do in this episode is briefly discuss the assassination and its aftermath through the outbreak of the war, and then focus on the major battles fought by Austria-Hungary from 1914 to 1918. As mentioned in the previous episode, Franz Ferdinand was the nephew of Emperor Franz Joseph, and next in line to the throne of the Habsburg monarchy. He was also the Inspector General of the Armed Forces, and it was in this capacity that he was in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia, in June 1914. You might recall from the last episode that Bosnia had been annexed by Austria in 1908, giving rise to a diplomatic crisis. Among the countries angered by Austria's move had been the Kingdom of Serbia, which had its own designs on Bosnia since the region was home to a large number of Serbs. In the 6 years since Austria had annexed Bosnia, relations had been tense. Although Serbia had ultimately recognized Austria's annexation, the Serbian people on both sides of the border were unhappy with the situation. In particular, a guerrilla organization called the Black Hand had formed, which took issue with the annexation of Bosnia and intended to make its dissatisfaction known through the use of violence. We should acknowledge that Franz Ferdinand's visit to Sarajevo was a provocation to Serbian nationalists. For one thing, the visit coincided with the Serbian Orthodox feast of St. Vidovdan and the anniversary, according to the Orthodox calendar, of the Battle of Kosovo in 1389. It was this battle at which Serbia lost its independence to the Turks. It was thus not only an important date in the Serbian religion, but also in Serbian history. Additionally, the Feast of St. Vidovdan was a national holiday in the Kingdom of Serbia. Franz Ferdinand's visit can easily be seen as a provocation given this fact. Moreover, his visit was also an obvious assertion of Austrian sovereignty over the region. Within this context, the assassination is perhaps less surprising. As we likely all know, the Archduke and Archduchess were attacked by members of the Black Hand while the couple was being driven across the capital. The most famous of the assassins was Gavrilo Princip, who died in the Bohemian town of Theresienstadt, where he was imprisoned in a military garrison. Princip and his accomplices were all arrested shortly after the assassination. The Austrian government's reaction to the assassination was divided. Certainly few people were happy about what had happened, but the question of how to react was complicated. Some Austrian leaders, particularly those in the military and foreign ministry, saw the assassination as an opportunity to attack Serbia militarily and neutralize it as a regional threat. Emperor Franz Joseph decided to wait until he had heard the results of a criminal inquiry being made into the events, including interrogations of the assassins. An important point to bear in mind here is that the assassination had set off an international crisis, which means that Austria would not be acting alone. Rather, since the foreign ministry and military of Austria and Hungary were united, in addition to both realms having Franz Joseph as their monarch, the governments of both Austria and Hungary would need to respond. The Austrian minister-president Karl von Sturck stood behind the army, foreign ministry, and emperor. However, the Hungarian prime minister István Tisza was against going to war. If war was to result, it would be necessary for Austria to be able to call upon its allies. Chief among these allies was the German Empire and its monarch, Kaiser Wilhelm II. Since 1879, Austria and Germany had been in a military alliance, agreeing to aid one another in case of war with Russia. In 1882, this dual alliance was extended to include Italy in a triple alliance. It was this triple alliance, as well as alliances of other countries with each other on both the Austrian side and the Serbian side, that turned a local conflict into a continental one. On the basis of this alliance, the German emperor and military swiftly agreed to support Austria against Serbia, providing to Austria-Hungary by July 6th what has been called a blank check. However, Austria-Hungary was not yet ready to act. Increasingly, Hungarian Prime Minister Tisza was a lone voice cautioning against war. On the Austrian side, Minister-President Sturck and the Germans called for war. A decision was made to wait a few weeks and, in the meantime, to offer an ultimatum to Serbia. This ultimatum, which was officially issued on July 23rd, consisted of 10 terms designed to force the Kingdom of Serbia to rein in ultranationalists and irredentists, and to act decisively to stop incitement against the Habsburg monarchy and its press and institutions. Serbia was given only 2 days to respond, but ultimately accepted 9 of the 10 terms. The one term that Serbia rejected was a demand that Austria-Hungary be able to conduct its counterterrorism exercises on Serbian soil. This demand went too far, essentially asking Serbia to sacrifice its very sovereignty. Austria refused to rescind the final demand and prepared for war. Here, the continental alliances on both sides began to kick in. Both Austria-Hungary and Serbia began mobilizing their militaries, which was to be expected. Next to mobilize was France. This decision might seem surprising, but it was likely motivated by 2 factors. First, since 1894, France had its own alliance with Russia, and as we have already discussed, Russia was the primary diplomatic supporter and benefactor of Serbia. If Serbia went to war, it was possible that Russia would go to war as well. If Russia went to war, then under Austria's alliance with Germany, Germany would also go to war. That was the second reason for France's mobilization. Military action in Europe could very well mean German action against France, regardless of the initial cause of war breaking out. As predicted, Russia ordered a mobilization, albeit only a partial one, which expanded into a full mobilization once Austria-Hungary formally declared war on Serbia on July 28th and began a naval bombardment of Belgrade, Serbia's capital. In response to Russian mobilization, Germany mobilized on August 1st. The UK offered to guarantee French neutrality to keep them both out of the war. But Germany invaded neutral Luxembourg and declared war on Russia, France, and neutral Belgium. Britain felt compelled to declare war. By August 6th, Austria-Hungary was also at war with both Serbia and Russia. For the first year of the war, Austria's energies were directed against Serbia and Russia. From its bombardment of Belgrade, Austria launched a ground invasion of Serbia on August 15th to engage in battle at Sir Mountain, about 100 kilometers west of Belgrade. After 10 days of fighting, Serbia was victorious, with the Austro-Hungarian army retreating back into its own territory. Serbia then mounted a counteroffensive into Austrian territory. In response, Austria-Hungary invaded Serbian territory on another front, with both armies ultimately stopping their advancements by September 24th. A third invasion of Serbia by the Austro-Hungarian army was attempted, with the invaders advancing to the Kolubara River by November 16th. There, the Austro-Hungarians were engaged by the Serbians. Fighting first went well for the Austro-Hungarians, with Belgrade falling to them on December 1st. However, another Serbian counteroffensive pushed the Austro-Hungarians first out of Belgrade and then back onto their own territory by mid-December. Austria-Hungary had suffered 275,000 casualties in this campaign, more than 100,000 more casualties than Serbia, nor had the army done much better against Russia. In August and September of 1914, the two countries had engaged in Poland, split between the Habsburg crown land of Galicia and the Russia province called Congress Poland. Despite some early victories, by September 11th, Russia was occupying the eastern part of Galicia and the neighboring Habsburg crown land of Bukovina. 1914 ended with Austria-Hungary's military in poor condition. 1915 would be spent trying to make up for its losses the previous year. For the first half of 1915, the army regrouped and in May joined the German army in Galicia to push the Russians out, culminating in the Russians' so-called Great Withdrawal. However, there was new trouble for Austria-Hungary. Although, as noted, Italy had been an ally of Germany and Austria, it had remained neutral in the summer of 1914. In April 1915, Italy had signed a treaty with the UK, according to which Italy would receive Austrian territory in the Balkans and Alps in exchange for fighting on the side of Britain, France, and Russia. On May 23rd, Italy declared war on Austria-Hungary. Austria was now fighting on 3 fronts: Russia, Serbia, and Italy. Austria-Hungary engaged Serbia again in the fall of 1915. Over 6 weeks, with the help of Germany and their new ally Bulgaria, Austria seized Belgrade again and ultimately occupied Serbia as its army fled south to the Greek island of Corfu. Fighting against the Italians proved more difficult. From May 1915 to late October 1917, Austria and its allies fought 11 major battles against Italy. 5 were Italian victories, 3 were Austrian and German victories, and 3 were inconclusive. A 12th battle, called the Battle of Caporetto, lasted nearly a month in the fall of 1917, but resulted in an Austrian and German victory as they drove deeper into Italian territory. Meanwhile, Russia took advantage of Austria-Hungary's army being drawn south to launch its Brusilov offensive in the summer of 1916, in which Russia retook Galicia and Bukovina. Around that same time, Romania entered the war on the side of Russia, France, and the UK, drawing Austria-Hungary, Germany, their ally the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria into war on yet another front. 1917 ended with a victory for Austria and its allies in Romania. 1918, the final year of the war, saw the United States' entry into the war and the final countdown to victory for the US, UK, and France. Russia's new Bolshevik government would pull Russia out of the war in early 1918, freeing Germany's hand to move major forces to the Western Front. Meanwhile, Austria's fight would remain in Central Europe and the Balkans. During the previous summer of 1917, Greece had entered the war, providing the Serbian army ground to regroup and prepare to counterattack the Austrian and Bulgarian occupiers of Serbia. This offensive and the Romanian counteroffensive ultimately pushed Austria-Hungary out of the Balkans permanently by the end of September, with Austria's final loss to the Italians at the Battle of Vittorio Veneto from October 24th to November 4th. Austria-Hungary was finally knocked out of the war entirely and left totally defeated, and within a few days Germany too had agreed to a ceasefire and the war was over. Rather than going immediately into a discussion of the post-war period and the radical transformation of Austria, there are important points to consider about the domestic scene in Austria during the 4 years of the war, as well as what Austria's performance in the war says about its final years as a great power. We will cover both those topics in the next episode. Thanks for listening.